What do you do when you have 35 seconds to live? What do you do when you have 35 seconds to live? You see, every fighter pilot, I don't care how long ago they flew their airplane, knows one procedure by heart. If you've seen the movie Top Gun, you'll remember there's a scene in that movie where Maverick and Goose are flying in their airplane. They are completely out of control. They are over the desert. They end up over the sea. And there's that moment where Maverick ejects out of the airplane and Goose hits the canopy and goes into the water. And there's that long scene afterwards where Maverick is dealing with the loss of his co-pilot. You see, every fighter pilot, I don't care what they flew and when they flew it, knows one procedure by heart. And that procedure is the out of control flight procedure. In the F-18, the airplane that I used to fly quite some time ago now, back all the way back to 2006. In the F-18, that procedure goes like this: controls release, feet off rudder, speed brake in. If still out of control, throttles idle, altitude, AOA, airspeed, and yaw rate check. When recovery indicated by AOA and yaw rate tones removed, side forces subsided, and airspeed accelerating above 100 knots, recover. Passing 6,000 feet AGL, dive recovery not initiated, eject. Now, I didn't practice that this morning. I don't have notes in front of me with that on it. That procedure is burned into my brain, and there's a reason for that. When you're in an airplane, a fighter aircraft that's out of control, you're normally falling to the ground at about 20,000 feet per minute. Now, we have a little procedures manual that sits in our, hang on a second, I want to make sure that my sound is checking out. So can you guys let me know if this is coming through loud and clear? Just give me an okay, because I saw one comment in chat that said that the sound wasn't coming through. So give me a okay on the sound. And Delisa, if you could let me, oh, okay, so got it, I got it. Good to go. So Jim, I think you need to turn your volume up. By the way, welcome everybody. My name's Ed Rush. Welcome to the Bunker Bash. Today we're going to talk about what to do when your leaders fail you, and they are. But I'm going to tell you, there's a bright, positive note at the end of all this. But back into my story. Thank you. Thank you for that. By the way, I'm going to say hello to a whole bunch of you in chat. So jump in, say hello. I would love to be able to just say hello to you, to connect with you. And we're going to have a blast here. I'm going to go and show you what the challenges we're having right now. But in a moment, I'm going to show you what to do about it. Anyway, let's get back into the story. So in every fighter aircraft, there is a procedures manual. I know some of you are pilots. Like I was talking to Ed Winberry recently over email. He's flown a whole bunch of different airplanes. Well, every airplane, there's a procedures manual. It tells you what to do when you get into problems. So if you have a flight control problem, you check out your procedures. If you have a systems problem, you check out your procedures. But when you're falling to the ground at 20,000 feet per minute, you don't have time to read a book. So you memorize a procedure. Now, every fighter pilot hopes that they never find themselves in a situation where their airplane is out of control, and I've done it twice. Most people don't do it that many times. I failed kindergarten, so maybe a little below average on the curve. But the last time that I was out of control in an F-18, it was over the Sea of Japan. I was flying with a very young student who I was training. We were about 100 miles away from our base in Okinawa, and we were executing a dogfight. This is two airplanes, one against one, shooting simulated missiles at each other. We shoot simulated missiles in training because, you know, to shoot the other thing would be bad for morale. But we were fighting against each other, and it was two airplanes that separated and then passed each other. This is typically where our dogfight starts, right about here, passing each other at about 1,000 miles an hour worth of closure, each airplane going roughly 500 miles an hour. And in this exact moment, both airplanes in this particular dogfight pulled directly nose high, about 7 to 8 Gs into the vertical, pulling as hard as we could, and then passing in what's called a slow speed merge at about 500 miles an hour worth of closure, or 250 miles an hour on each airplane. Now, at this moment, my young student makes a decision that's a perfectly acceptable decision for him to make. He starts a easy left-hand turn. At this point, I make a decision which is a perfectly acceptable decision for me to make, which is a easy second half of a loop. Now, this maneuver that I'm doing right here, which is called a double Immelman, is a very difficult maneuver to execute. But when you do it well, what ends up happening is you pull up over the top. This other airplane is turning right here, and you create about 4,000 feet of unopposed airspace. What that means is I can use gravity to pull my nose down, but he can't use gravity to pull his nose up. In fact, he has to fight against gravity, making it almost impossible for him to counter any missiles that I send his way. And I'm seeing all this happen in my head into the future as I'm looking to see my airplane turn. I was going to take a Sidewinder missile and then close in for the guns, which basically means you win. While all this is happening in my head, what's really happening on planet Earth is I'm running out of airspeed and ideas at exactly the same time while my airplane is pointed directly at the sky. All of a sudden, my airplane begins to fall because when you're out of airspeed, you're no longer flying, you're falling. And it picks up this great big out of control mode on my way to the ground, or in this case, on my way to the sea. I quickly look up at my heads up display. That tells me whether I'm climbing, descending, turning left, turning right. It also tells me my altitude, and I see that I'm at 20,000 feet above the water. I look up at my heads up display again and see that I'm falling to the ground at 20,000 feet per minute. Now, I'm no math expert, but I can tell you if you're at 20,000 feet, you're falling to the ground at 20,000 feet per minute, you got about a minute to live. But what's worse is that procedure that I just gave you, out of control flight procedure, says that 6,000 feet above the ground, in this case above the water, if you're not fully back under control, it's time for you to eject. So I have 4 decisions I can make in the cockpit, but my first step is this: extreme responsibility, 100% ownership of the problem. Here's why. You see, I was the idiot that got myself into that situation in the first place, and there was no one else who could save me. In this case, there's nobody in my back seat. I was in a single seat airplane. In this case, I'm talking to air traffic control, but there's nothing they can do to help me. I've got a commanding officer back at my base. There's nothing he can do to help me. I've got maintenance personnel back at the base. There's nothing they can do to help me. I've got the commandant of the Marine Corps back in Washington. Man, he's in charge of everything. There's nothing he can do to help me. I've got the president. I got the president sitting in the White House, and there's nothing he can do to help me. Extreme responsibility, 100% ownership is the first step in solving the problem. Option number 1 for me is I can ride an airplane all the way into the water, $40 million airplane, and my life is lost. Option number 1 is not acceptable to me that day. Option number 2, I can eject at 6,000 feet over some of the most shark-infested waters in the entire world. I can float in a parachute while my $40 million airplane still goes into the Sea of Japan. And I can sit there and wait for about 2 hours, chumming essentially for sharks while I'm waiting for a helicopter to pick me up. Option 2 is not acceptable for me that day. Option number 3, I could become a test pilot. I could just try some new things and see how it works out. But option 3 isn't acceptable for me that day. Option 4 was the route that I took with, which is to execute the procedure that I just memorized and read before you. While executing that procedure, controls release, feet off rudder. By the way, it is interesting that the first procedure in the F-18 is to let go for a moment. Let the airplane do what it needs to do to recover itself. And sure enough, at about 7,000 to 8,000 feet above the water, my F-18 began to recover itself. Airspeed accelerated above 180 knots, and I started to pull the airplane away from imminent disaster. A very alive pilot, a very nervous pilot, a very embarrassed pilot, but as I said, a very alive pilot. So I tell you that story to show you the perfect analogy for the world that we live in right now. Let me be very clear with you. We live in a world that involves risk. But you already knew that. If you're on this show watching right now, it's likely that you're an entrepreneur or a small business owner or both. You risk every single day that you walk into the office. You are taking a risk, but you do it because it's worth it. You have a message or a vision or an experience or a product that you want to share with the world, and it's worth it. Look, you could go work for 7-Eleven. You could go work for Starbucks, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what I'm here to tell you is that if you go do that, you're giving up all of the risk. And because our economy works on risk and reward, or better, responsibility versus reward, you take the risk, you take ownership, like I did in the airplane that day, you take responsibility, and you're willing to do that because the reward is worth it. For most business owners, the reward comes in three forms. In one form, it's income. In another form, it's impact. You want to change the world. And the third form is lifestyle. You want to create a lifestyle where you can spend more time with your kids or your grandkids or the ones that you know. Now, I'm here to tell you and look you in the eye and tell you that the economy of our nation just changed, and the effects will last for the next 80 years. And so for a moment on today's show, we're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to talk about what just happened in the economy, okay? And I'm going to take you through what I consider some bad news. But as you remember from yesterday's interview with Michael Haig, a news story isn't a news story without a conflict resolution at the end. And we're going to get to the point where we find out together what to do when your leaders fail you. And in my opinion, they just did. By the way, my name's Ed Rush. Welcome to the Bunker Bash. I'm a 5-time #1 best-selling author, former F-18 fighter pilot. You probably heard the story. Please jump in and say hello in chat. If you haven't joined us before, chat will show up on the right-hand side or below, depending on the social media platform that you are on right now. I would love to be able to say hello to you. So many of you have jumped in and said hello already on chat, and I'll go through some of you and say hello in just a second, but I got to roll up my sleeves and talk about what just happened inside of the United States. Now, in a moment, I'm going to jump on this board and I'm going to draw some things out. And I want you to grab a pen and write this down. When I get done laying out the groundwork of what we just saw happen in our United States of America, and in fact, probably happening across the world, I'm going to give you 4 solutions that we can take as a country at the governmental level. And I'm going to give you 6 solutions that you can choose from at the individual level. Now, I used to have a boss in the Marine Corps. This guy was one of my favorite bosses. He wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but he certainly knew how to lead. And one day, he put this big yellow sign on the front of his door, and then he closed the door, and the sign said this: "Do not come to me with your problem unless you come to me with a solution to your problem." Okay, and I love that. I love that from a leadership perspective, because I was like, man, I like that. I'm not going to talk to you about a problem unless I can bring to you a potential solution to the problem. And you can bet I've got a solution to this problem. So say hello. What's up, Lee Waters, David Zetz, Jason Jordan, Scott Anderson, Mike Toy, my man. Good to see you. Michael Haig, my friend. And we're just talking about our time yesterday. All right, so let's roll up our sleeves and talk about our world and our nation. And when I get done, I'm going to have some suggestions for you. And then I'm going to take some questions. And then we're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to get better as entrepreneurs. I got some other thoughts on how you can make some money during this time, expand your influence, and have a whole lot more fun. So let's face it. Our world is in crisis. The first order problem is the coronavirus that hit probably sometime beginning of November and has been kind of moving across the world ever since then. Make no mistake, I'm not going to talk much about this today. Make no mistake, it's a big deal, okay? I'm not going to minimize that by what I'm about to say next, but what I can tell you is that the second and third order effects of the coronavirus pandemic that are hitting the world are far worse and will last way longer. The second and third order effects, by the way, are the economic decisions that our nations are making, combined with the civil liberty decisions that our nations and local governments are making. I'm not going to talk today about the civil liberty discussion. We're going to do that again at some point. But what I'm going to do is tell you what just happened with the economy, but more importantly, what you can do about it. Now, a couple of disclaimers. First of all, I am not an investment advisor and I am not an economist. I am, however, a person that knows what's going on, and I care deeply about our country, and I care deeply about you. Number 2, I also recognize that now is a hard time to lead. So I'm not, I'm going to, in certain ways, throw our leaders under the bus, but I'm not going to do it without the full knowledge that you know as well as I do that this is a difficult time, and making decisions, it's hard to make decisions in a difficult time. The third thing I'll say by way of disclaimer is I acknowledge that this is a real problem and that life is hard for a lot of people. There are people who are losing their jobs right now. There are people who are having a hard time bringing in money right now. I would suggest to you that the solution to those problems are more likely to be found on the local level, things like churches, nonprofit, and community groups. I would suggest to you that the best solution for my next door neighbor, who we know and love, who's in his 80s, is community with us. We've been helping him. And our other neighbor across the street, who's in her 60s, we've been helping too. And so I'm not denying the fact that there's not an economic problem. What I would suggest is that the solution to those problems can more likely be found at the local level than at the federal level. Now, for a moment, I want you to imagine a great big gigantic beach ball. It's about this big. You've seen those beach balls that people blow up and knock around the beach, or they knock around on like a stadium. You see them during concerts moving about all the time. So I want you to imagine this great big beach ball. And I want you to imagine that this ball is floating on a big lake. And every time the wind blows, the ball just kind of moves a little bit. And every time the waves go up, the ball comes up. And every time the wave comes down, the ball comes down. In other words, the ball moves around, but the ball moves around based on the natural forces that are moving the ball around. And generally speaking, sometimes the ball speeds up a little bit, and sometimes the ball slows down. And when the waves are really big, the ball goes up and down, but not that violently. I mean, generally speaking, the ball kind of stays right on top of the water. Now, I want you to imagine for a second that somebody comes and grabs that ball. And that person decides, you know what, I want this ball to be as far below the water as humanly possible. In fact, I'm going to push this ball down, 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 down. That person can hold the ball underwater for a certain period of time, but not forever. And when they let go, the violence with which that ball moves up out of the water column and into the air is significantly more than the violence with which it had its average ebbs and flows. And I'm going to use that analogy as we spend our time together, because in a certain way, that ball represents the economy of the United States of America, or in fact, the economy of the world. And that person holding or pushing that ball down is when bureaucrats get involved in moving an economy that shouldn't be touched by them in the first place. And I'm here to tell you that we have a 107-year history in the United States of America of bureaucrats pushing and messing with the economy. And what you're seeing is that each crash is greater than the last. That should tell you something. Now, I'm going to go back quickly to risk and reward. But instead of risk and reward, we're going to call it together responsibility and reward. Remember the story that I told you about the out-of-control airplane? How the first decision that I had to make at 20,000 feet, falling to the ground at 20,000 feet per minute, was extreme responsibility. It was my fault. It was my responsibility, and there was nobody else who was going to get me out of that trouble besides me and that airplane. There was no one to ask for help. There was no one to ask, can you help get me out of this? I did it myself, but now there was nothing to do other than me and the airplane. And I'm here to tell you, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as someone who wants to change the world, that the greater responsibility you take, the greater reward you will have. So about 20 years ago, a Navy carrier pulled out of San Diego Harbor right here. And while under tug, that Navy carrier hit a sandbar. In that moment, the Navy relieved the captain of the ship, who wasn't even on the bridge at the time, because Navy carriers don't hit sandbars. The issue wasn't his fault, but the issue, in fact, was his responsibility. And right now, you're hearing things out of the media like this. There are companies that are too big to fail. Do you catch that? They'll say there are companies that are too big to fail. What they're saying, in essence, is there are companies and organizations that are too big for responsibility. And I'm here to tell you that when a government begins to take risk or responsibility out of the center of the picture, the people who always end up taking it on the chin, the ones that always get screwed, are the middle class small business owners. And I'm going to explain this to you, and I'm going to jump up on the board. It's exactly right. Gina Longo said, when you're the captain, the buck stops with you. All right, so I'm going to jump up on the board here real quick, and I'm going to do this little economic discussion right here on the whiteboard. Now, really quickly, while I'm jumping up here and erasing this, there is a button below you that says share, okay? And in a moment, I'm going to tell you what to do right now in the economy that we're facing, and your friends are going to want to see this. So do me a favor, click the like button, that little button, while I pick up my pen off the floor. Click the like button, click the share button, tell your friends about the show real quick, and we're going to get rocking and rolling. Okay, so when you have an economy operating the way that it should, what you have essentially is you have the high, the middle, and the low, okay? So most people find themselves in the middle class. Low should be a transient time, okay, when you're maybe trying to figure things out, or maybe you're a student or something like that. I'm going to move this so that you can see without the shiny light here. Let's do this. Boom. Okay, this is the way an economy is supposed to work. When you insert excessive bureaucracy, okay, into an economy, here's what happens. These people end up getting more money. And these people end up getting more money because they're friends of the bureaucrats, and friends help friends. These people also end up getting more money. And these people get more money because your politicians are virtue signaling so that they can give these people money. They're showing, we're going to give these people down here money because look, we're really helping people out. Now, when these people get more money and these people get more money, the people who pay for it are these folks right here. Okay? Because what happens is the government begins to take responsibility away from the people at the top, begins to take responsibility away from the people at the bottom. And what happens is you're stuck paying for it. Okay? So a couple more thoughts on this. The genesis of the problem starts right here. Okay? The genesis of this problem starts with number one, this phrase right here, do something. This is what a distressed country says to its leaders. So listen, when we have a problem as a nation, we instinctively turn to our governmental leaders at the highest level and say, do something. Now, I'm not going to do much on the roots of this. What I would suggest to you is that at some point, as a nation, we have forgotten that we are, in fact, as it says right on our money, incidentally, it says, in God we trust. In our Pledge of Allegiance, for example, it says one nation under God. Okay, when you read the Declaration of Independence, it speaks of a creator endowing us with unalienable rights. And I would suggest to you that as a nation, because we forgot God, people always need to look to someone greater than them for help. Okay, and as a nation, because we forgot the fact that we are one nation, in fact, under God, that what happens is we begin to, as a nation, look someplace, because we need to look someplace for help with our problems, and we're looking, I would suggest to you, in the wrong place. We're yelling to our governmental leaders, you need to do something. Now, this is accentuated by the fact that as a government, we legislate in 2-year blocks. The reason that we legislate in 2-year blocks is because every 2 years, the entirety of Congress, every single one of the House of Representatives, not the Senate, that's every 6 years, every one of the House of Representatives turns over or faces an election cycle. Every 4 years, the president goes through an election cycle, and every 6 years, the Senate goes through an election cycle. So at the most, we look in 4-year terms, but really every 2 years is the vision with which we're looking. Now, there is a country in the world whose name is China. And China, in 1946, secretly published a 100-year plan for world domination. 100-year plan. Juxtapose that with the United States of America, which typically has a 2-year plan. When you put these two things together, you have the recipe for a disaster. Okay? Now, I'm going to give you just a little bit of background. We're going to have some fun with this, okay? And then what I'm going to do is tell you what to do. Now, but I need to do this because we need to define the terms that we're talking about. Okay? So, in the United States of America, we have an organization called the Fed, also known as the Federal Reserve. Now, we haven't always had this organization. For example, when the Constitution was written back in the 1700s, it didn't make a provision for an independent board of bankers that made financial decisions for our country. The Fed was started in 1913. Fed was started to minimize, they said, the effect of the economics ups and downs. In other words, the Fed was designed to make sure that that beach ball that was floating up and down in the water, that beach ball didn't go up too far and didn't really go down too far. The Fed is the person in the water who started to push the ball down. Now, the Fed has 7 chair members or 7 members of its board, and the top member is the chairman of the Federal Reserve. You know him as Jerome Powell. You remember perhaps Bernanke. You probably remember Alan Greenspan. Those are the chairmen of the Fed. Now, here's the interesting thing. The Fed is appointed by the president. The Fed is confirmed by Congress, but the Fed has no oversight. There isn't a single agency of our 3 branches of government, which we're supposed to have all this balance of power and checks and balances. There's no one who actually oversees Feds. Now, the Fed controls money essentially by managing one thing, okay? And they do more than this, but I'm just simplifying this for our discussion. There's what's called a federal funds rate that the Fed controls that number. And the federal funds rate, to make this as simple as possible, is every day, at the end of the day, the banks have to balance their books, right? So the banks have to take their books and make sure that they have a certain percentage of money on hand versus how much they've lent. They have a certain percentage they need. And if they don't have that, what they do is they borrow money overnight from the Federal Reserve for a short period of time. Now, the Federal Reserve rate can float anywhere from 0 all the way up to 5 or 6 or 7%, but lately it's been in about the 2 to 3% range, and the Fed moves that rate up or down to manage 2 things together, okay? So if it goes up, what happens is growth slows down, but so does inflation. In other words, money supply begins to contract because people aren't lending as much. And when the number goes down, growth goes up, but inflation potentially could go up because there's more supply of money. And the best way that I could describe this for you is look at college tuition. If you took away student loans, if there was no such thing as a student loan, college tuition would actually be pretty low because people wouldn't be able to afford $45,000 a year for college unless they had a loan. And so you can see, for example, like when I went to school at William & Mary back in the 1990s, when I went to school, my tuition as an out-of-state student was about $6,800. In-state was about $1,500. Now it's over $30,000. Okay, and the reason for that is because money has become easy to get. Prices have actually gone up. Okay, now, I'm not here to talk about what's better, low interest rates or high interest rates. All I'm here to tell you is that the Federal Reserve controls money supply by moving that rate. And a week ago, the Federal Reserve took that number and went to 0. I'm not saying that was a bad decision. I'm simply saying that combined with the next thing the government just did this morning, by the way, at the airing of this, and we're doing this on Wednesday, March 25th, this morning, the second thing the government did is a recipe for a disaster because they did 2 things simultaneously that are going to launch future catastrophe that we can talk about, okay? So that's the Federal Reserve. The Treasury, by the way, the Treasury Department does not, the Treasury Department prints money. They print paper money and coins, but the Treasury Department itself doesn't usually control money supply. That's done by the multiplicative effects of that lending rate, okay? Anyway, we could go more into economic theory if you want to. I'm just setting the foundation. Now, back in 2008, hopefully you're following me so far because I'm going to tell you in a minute what to do, okay? Back in 2008, what happened was the stock market crashed. You remember this, that in 2008, right coming into the election, the stock market dumped itself, okay? In that moment, what the government did, remember I said that we've got this, by the way, this is not moonshine, okay? But it might as well be for where we're headed, okay? So I'm gonna get to the good stuff in a second. 2008, the market crashed, remember that. what happened in that moment was two things simultaneously. The Fed lowered interest rates, and at the same time, the federal government pumped a whole bunch of money into the economy. Now, the money they put into the economy back then largely went to some of the biggest companies in the world that they said were, quote, too big to fail. And simultaneously, while they were giving money to some of the biggest companies in the world, the owners and CEOs of those companies were buying back their own shares given the money that they were getting from the federal government. So I want you to think about that for a second. Their share price was high, they started to sell and make money. Their share price was low, they got money from the federal government to start buying back their own shares, which is the reason why you see in the news stories today, everyone is saying, make sure that when we're giving money to big government, these big companies right now, that they can't buy their own shares back because they were winning at the top, they were winning at the bottom. That's what happens when you begin to take away responsibility, okay? At the same time, so the market crashed, the Fed lowered rates, the government put a whole bunch of money into some of the biggest businesses in the world, because remember, they were too big to fail, and at the same time, near simultaneously added about $2 trillion to the national debt. Now, the way to look at this is about every $100 billion, if you are a taxpayer, which I'm assuming you are, about every $100 billion that the government adds to the debt for you is about $1,000, okay? So when a government adds $2 trillion to the national debt, what that is for you is about, I'll just write it down here, is about $20,000 of your money, of your future money that they're going to need to get back from you. I've got a solution for this, by the way, in just a second. Okay, what happened when this happened in 2008 is the market stabilized. Okay, so they looked at that as a success, but two things weren't fixed. The first thing that wasn't fixed was the national debt. Okay, which as of today, I'm going to show you in a second, has exceeded $25 trillion. So you're not at 20K anymore, by the way. You're way over that. Okay, the second thing that happened that didn't happen in 2008 is they didn't fix the debt bubble. So you've heard that phrase before. People talk about the debt bubble. The debt bubble, okay, what the debt bubble is excessive lending with regard to assets, okay? So I already mentioned to you, student debt has gone up. Now, I think it's over $1 trillion. Yeah, student debt's gone up over $1 trillion. With that, the price of college came up. Mortgage debt has gone up. Corporate debt is now over $75 trillion. Personal debt is now over $13 trillion. And simultaneous to that, what that causes inside of the stock market, so there's a thing called price to earnings, which is how a company is typically valued, right? What is their price? What is their earnings? What happened over the next 10 years in the stock market is price to earnings skyrocketed because money was so easy to get. So remember what I said, what happened is they added to the national debt while simultaneously not solving this solvency problem that we have inside of personal and business. And then all of a sudden, last week, 2020, just last week, the market crashes again. Now, anytime the market crashes, the government's got a couple of choices to make, but they spent their entire wad, okay? The Fed moved interest rates down to zero last week to stimulate the market. The day the Fed moved the interest rates, the market descended another 12.9%. Think about the market reaction to something like that. It was designed to make it go, and they literally shot every possible thing they had, and it still went down. At the exact same time, the government announced a stimulus plan, which, by the way, is being signed as we speak for $2 trillion, the biggest stimulus plan in the history of history. But what's happening right now that wasn't happening in 2008 is our economy has largely ground almost to a halt. I mean, there's a lot of people right now who aren't working, and there's a lot of money that's not moving. And what I'm here to tell you is that the federal government, in an effort to remove responsibility, in other words, the federal government in a way of removing risk, or the federal government responding to please do something, please help us, is creating a catastrophe for you and me, but more importantly, for our kids. I've got 4 kids in the room right above me right now. I've got a 13-year-old, A 14-year-old, a 13-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 1-year-old. I know, don't laugh. I know what causes that. They are going to pay the price for this. My son, who's a 13-year-old, is interested in business and growing a business. And I'm here to tell you, unless he ends up at the top where he can call, by the way, how many senators do you think got phone calls this week from leaders in industry that said, hey, we're going to get some money this week? You're going to hook us up? How many of those phone calls? A lot of those phone calls. Guess who wasn't making those phone calls? You and me. Okay? Because you and I are going to end up paying for this. Because when you take away risk, when you take away responsibility, what you do is you take away the incentive to play. And you end up in a space as a small business owner like us sometimes going, why am I even going to play anymore? Okay? Now, that's all the negative stuff. I'm going to tell you the positive part of this, okay? So roll up your sleeves. And I'm going to do this really quickly. I want to just say hello to some of you in chat because I've been rolling here, all right? And we're having fun. But I want to just say hello to some of you. This has been awesome. And so Leora Bach says, yep, remember Edron. Alan Reed says, great to hear your teachings again. You're awesome, man. Scott Mueller, I'm getting there, baby. I'm getting to the good stuff. Scott Simkin from Gilbert, Arizona. Glad to be alive and well, baby. Scott, what's up, man? Amen to that. Speak the truth, says, hey, what's up, Jason? Good to see you, man. Let's see, Richard. Oh, hold on a second. Oh, you guys are just saying hello to each other. Yeah, the book, by the way, the book is the 100-year marathon if you're interested in the China 100-year plan. And what's up, Frank? Good to see you, man. Hello to everybody. I'm going to get through this content, and then I'm going to take your questions, by the way. But this is actually really interesting. Stephen King Muhammad said, knowledge is power. You got that right, man. By the way, I went through just about every news story I could find this morning on just about every news source, and I didn't hear anybody talking about this, okay? And I'm here to tell you that what happened simultaneously with an economy that's beginning to slow down is near disastrous for our future. By the way, this is going to blow your mind. I want to show you something. There's a website which I highly recommend that you go and take a look at. Not right now because we're hanging out right now, but in a minute. I want you to look at this. Is the national debt calculator. Okay, this is the national debt clock. See what that says right there? 23 trillion. That's a T. $23 trillion. Debt per citizen, like my kids sitting upstairs, each of them 72K. This right here, 100. If you pay taxes, which you probably do because you're a business owner, 100. You're in right now. Right now, by the way, you're in for $190,000. I want you to think about that for a second. Now, check it out. Ready? You're because of what just happened, the stimulus plan is $2 trillion. The Fed's bailout is $4 trillion. Okay, so theoretically, what's going to be added to that $23 trillion? This is already $23 trillion. I should write all the zeros, by the way. What's being added to this is another 6, taking it up to 29. Plus, we've got our current spending bill. Make it 30. Okay, I want you to think about this for a second. At a 0.5%, just a 0.5% of interest. Think about the, hold on, wait, 30, what's a percentage? So I lost the math. I didn't have this prepared. At just a 0.5%, we're adding something like 310, hold on, where am I at on this? 350 billion every single year automatically. At a percent, at simply a percent, we're adding 300 billion every single year automatically tacked on to this debt. This is what you're going to owe. This is about $300,000 for each of us. Okay, now let's get to the good news. Okay, here's what you can do. I'm going to give you some solutions as to the things that you can do. And I'm going to start with our country as a nation and show you what I would recommend we do as a nation, next steps, and then what you can do personally. Okay, but let's talk about our big country for a second. By the way, I know we got folks overseas like Nabi and some other folks that are joining us. You got it too, okay? So you got leaders that you got to talk to as well. Okay, so the first thing, this is important. As a nation, if this was me, the first thing is you can't bail out big, slow, dumb companies, okay? Now, I know this sounds cruel and heartless, and maybe it is, okay? But there are some organizations that simply need to fail, okay? I'm gonna be really clear about this. If an airline doesn't make it, the pilots are gonna have jobs, the flight attendants are going to have jobs, the customer service people are gonna have jobs because another airline is going to hire them. You're still going to be able to fly from Detroit to New York or from San Diego to Utah. Those routes will still be there because demand will cause those routes. And so here in San Diego, I got some pilots that I know that used to fly for PSA, no longer around. They used to fly for TWA, no longer around. They used to fly for America West, no longer around. And I'm here to tell you that if the government bails out some of the big, dumb, slow companies, you're still going to have to pay a $200 change fee for a $150 ticket on United, okay? And I've got 2 of those sitting in my account right now, okay? The second thing, this is important. We need a new government from the ground up, okay? Listen to me carefully. We need to fire everyone, okay? Listen, I'm gonna put a chart up. I know this sounds like, listen, I don't care what your political party is. I want you to look at this for a second. This is, see this chart right here? Check it out. Red is Republican, blue is Democrat. The entire chart is the national debt, okay? Now, look at this. Red, blue, red, blue. Red, blue, red, blue. It doesn't matter the color. It's getting worse because they're all in it together. Remember what I said? You got the high class, middle class, low class. The money is flowing down, up and down from you and from me. And I'm here to tell you it's time for something new, okay? Most political leaders operate based on 4 priorities. Priority number 1 is what's going to get them reelected. They're talking about this openly right now. Priority number 2, they're talking about what will get them money so that they can get reelected. Priority number 3 is what gets their friends elected. And priority number 4 is what gets their friends money. Elected, money, and they talk openly about it right now. When my friends and I got together 3 years ago to begin creating a new choice for America, we wrote down 4 priorities. In fact, we wrote down what we consider 4 promises. I'll show you the website in just a second. By the way, it's EdBrush for America. The promises go like this. Number 1, as a leader, I'll never do anything that violates conscience. In other words, you'll always make the right decision. Priority number 2, what's best for the nation? Priority number 3, what's best for my state or my district? And then priority number 4, what's best for the world? And by the way, those are not in order, those are all together, because I believe with entrepreneurial thinking, you can do what's best for the country, your state, the world, and what's right all together. Most politicians today have 4 priorities: money, election, money, election. We need people who will look you in the eye and say, look, I know if I make this decision, it's going to hurt my chances of getting reelected, but I'm going to make it anyway, okay? Number 3, what to do with the national debt, all right? There is actually a simple solution to what to do with the national debt. It's not even that hard. And it's going to be number 3 and 4 that I'm going to put on the board. Remember I said we're on our way to $30 trillion, okay? Now, if you are a business owner and you have debt that you need to pay, okay? So if you're a business owner and you have debt that you need to pay, here's what you do. You sell assets to pay off debt, okay? So let's say I had to pay off a few $1,000s worth of debt and I didn't know where it was gonna come from. Well, I've got this car literally sitting right on the other side of this wall. That's like a beat up old Toyota that I occasionally drive to like get mulch or go to the Goodwill or something like that. That Toyota is probably worth about $3,500. If I needed the money, I would take the Toyota and I would take it down to CarMax and I would sell it for $3,500 and pay the debt, okay? Because smart business owners like you and me, entrepreneurs like you and me, we know how to take our assets and leverage that to pay off things. Because you know what? We don't have anybody to come and bail us out, okay? So the great news is the United States has a massive amount of assets. For example, the state of Nevada, 83% of the state of Nevada is owned by the federal government. Did you know that, by the way? That's not just the military land. That's not just the national parks. I'm talking about like wasteland out in the middle of nowhere that's being mismanaged by the Bureau of Land Management. The United States federal government amazingly owns a lot of the country. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not talking about national parks. I'm not talking about state parks. I'm not talking about Mount Rushmore. I'm not talking about any of those places. I'm talking about wasteland. But one of the first things we can do is we can sell assets. Look, that land in Nevada is probably better used by a private person who cares about the land than the federal government who doesn't. And I can tell you, we could solve national debt in about a year or two by selling off assets that are being mismanaged and misused anyway. Okay, think about this. All this is entrepreneurial thinking put into a simple problem. All right, number four, you can't sell the assets unless you control the spending. Okay, and the fourth step nationally is really simple: overhaul the spending. Look, the entire federal government is still in work, right? Everybody's still getting paid. And I'm not talking about the military. I'm not talking about the critical people that we have working at FEMA or places that National Institute of Health right now that need us, okay? I'm talking about big, fat, bureaucratic organizations whose time has come and gone. Anybody know what the Commerce Department does? How about this? Not much, okay? I'm talking about some of the big organizations that simply need to go. Listen, businesses, we do this all the time. We reinvent ourselves all the time. We bring in new contractors. We let go of some other people. We move fast because there are some times you don't need that MySpace expert, working on your MySpace page. Like, you don't need that person anymore. So what you did was hire a Facebook expert. We do this as business owners all the time. It's time to do this at the government. Basic, bottom 10%, bottom 20% spending overhaul. Okay, now, this is what you can do as a nation. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sit back down. By the way, I'm about 3 minutes away from your questions, okay? So I know I've been talking. I got a little excited about this stuff, but we're having fun. I hope you're having fun. I know you're having fun. All right, so I'm going to sit down. Yep, thank you, Barry. Term limits, yeah, no joke, man. I'm with you on that. All right, Yael, you got to listen. You have to listen. I said not the national parks, not the state parks, but I don't know if you've ever driven from Las Vegas all the way up to Elko, Nevada. There's nothing there. And it's being mismanaged by the government when a good person like you could probably take that land and do something amazing with it. All right? So pay attention. All right. So now, this is good. You guys are awesome. Yeah, Ed Barry says, too many bureaucrats. Fire them, but replace them with something better. This is where I'm going with this. All right, so now, here's what you can do, okay? Number one, I already mentioned this. I already said this when we were talking earlier. You can vote differently. I'm going to look you in the eye and tell you that the way that we as a nation have voted in the past has to go, okay? Lately, we've been voting based on tribal preference. And the truth is, I showed you this chart. This full disclosure, I stopped being a Republican during this red bar. That second red bar, second to the last red bar, I stopped being a Republican right then, okay? Because I was told that the Republican Party was the party of like fiscal conservatism, like we were good about the money, but that turned out not to be true. And I realized at that point that I didn't want to be told what to think anymore by my party tribal preference. And because I stopped thinking like the tribe, I started being able to think about things in a different way that was more creative or more entrepreneurial. And so I became a not party person, okay? So as a nation, we need to stop, I mean this when I say this, we need to stop primarily voting on issues and we need to start primarily voting on character. Here's why I tell you this. Your pet issue gets voted on about once every 7 years. But every moment in Congress and in the White House, there are decisions being made that you want to be made by a person of character. I'm not saying the issues aren't important. I am saying, however, they're not as important enough for us to build this tribal thing when what ends up happening is the two parties end up coming together and making decisions that work out best for them and their friends, okay? The second thing, what you can do is support small businesses. And by the way, you can do this right now. I went in and got takeout recently, and I gave them a good tip. I gave them a good tip because look, they're pulling tips anyway, and there's people who aren't working there, and the restaurant is kind of struggling. And you know what? I don't have a lot of excess either, but I have enough to be able to help somebody just a little bit. There are 3 companies right now that I bought products from that I can't use. One of them is a medical research company. I got this test kit for about $700 that I was going to send in, but their labs are right now fully dedicated to dealing with the coronavirus. $700, I could send that thing back right now and get my $700 back, but you know what? It's not the right thing to do, okay? If you're like going through and trying to figure out what small business you can refund from, that's a jerk thing to do, okay? That is not cool. Listen, everybody's trying to survive together. Everybody's trying to work together. So find a way to support not some big business, okay? I'm asking for my United refunds back, just to be clear. Not some big business, support a small business, okay? Third thing you can do. Now, I know this sounds like a contradiction, all right? But the third thing that you can do as a citizen for yourself is borrow at low rates. Right now, as a part of this $2 trillion package, the Small Business Association is going to start opening up disaster loans, a component of which may not need to be repaid based on your payroll and your rent. Here's my philosophy on this one. You ready for this? They're coming to get it from you soon anyway, and you might as well have it, because what's going to happen if you can borrow at a low fixed rate, and I'm not sure if the SBA is even going to be a fixed rate, by the way, but if you can borrow at a low fixed rate, what happens is as inflation picks up, which it has to, right? And as the interest rates grow, you're actually going to end up with free money that you can invest in yourself. You can invest in another business. I'm going to get to that in just a second. Okay, by the way, I'm about 2 minutes away from your comments. We're going to rock and do it. Okay, number 4, here's what you can do right now. And I mean like right now. Invest in you. My bullet number 6 coming up in a second is to talk about what we're going to be covering over the next 2 weeks right here on this Bunker Bash. And what we're going to cover is what I'm calling the new emerging expert economy. The entire economy is changing right now, okay? What's not going to be in vogue when this is over are big news agencies. Let me tell you, with full certainty, there will be huge news agencies in the next 2 to 4 years that will implode completely because of loss of viewership. People are turning their attention right now to individuals just like you for their guidance and their information. Make it your job to join the expert economy. People are interested and want to know what you have to say about things, okay? That's actually number 6. I'm jumping the gun, but when I say invest in you, if you need to do something now, for example, if you need to write a book. Like now's the time to write the book. If you need to learn how to live stream, learn how to live stream right now. I mean, I told you we're going to do this. I'm just trying to figure all this stuff out. Soon, I'm going to be doing a training on how to live stream like we're doing right now. Okay, so invest in you. Get better right now, because when the dust settles on all this, there's going to be this huge opportunity out there that you're going to want to take advantage of. Okay, now, if you have the resources, and you may in your IRA, you may someplace in your savings, my suggestion right now is to find and invest in small businesses that you could potentially be an investor or an investor advisor for, okay? So that's number 5, invest in small businesses. If you have that opportunity, right now, people are looking for cash, okay? Cash is tight. So you may have, for example, in your IRA, or you may have in your 401k, the opportunity to invest in businesses. Now, I'm not an expert economist and I'm not an investment advisor, but you need, the tool that I use is called a self-directed IRA, and you may or may not have that, but you are in charge of what you do with your money, okay? And you should be able to take it and invest it where you want to. And then number 6 I mentioned, which is join the expert economy. Listen, as the federal government starts grabbing cash, oh shoot, you know what I didn't put on here that I need to put on here? Find a good accountant. Find a good, I don't know why I think that's so funny. Find a good accountant, because let me tell you, it's not going to be long before they start coming for the money that they just spent. So That's number 7. Find a good accountant. All right. So summary, real quick, what you can do. Oh, geez. Vote differently. Support small businesses. Borrow at low rates. Invest in you. Invest in small businesses. Join. Oh gosh. And hire a good accountant. All right. So here's what I'm going to do. And by the way, I'm going to go back to this really quickly. I erased it. 4 things that you can do. Government can do. Don't bail out big, slow, stupid companies. Create a new government from the ground up. Sell land. And a spending overhaul. By the way, Gina, no, I'm not planning on selling. I'm not planning on selling the Native American reservations. That would be bad policy. Let me tell you, after all we've done to those folks, whoo. Oh boy. Oh boy. I'm just looking at some of the comments. Amen to character. Barry says, by the way, I'm going to take your comments and your questions. So if you have any questions, I didn't mean for this to go the full time. I actually had this planned for about the first 20 minutes, but you get on a roll and you get started going and we're having some fun. And by the way, you have 100% permission to disagree with me. I'm okay with that. Listen, we have a world that will begin to crumble financially. And when that happens, look, I'm looking for your answers too, okay? So if you got great economic ideas, look, I plan on creating a movement and building a following and changing our country. I realized 4 or 5 years ago, man, I started getting frustrated where we were going as a nation, where our character was going, about our decisions and where we were putting our money. And I got frustrated enough that I'm like, you know what? We're going to do something about this. And so for the last 3 years, I've been traveling the country, training up new leaders, okay? I've been working with people in the third party movement. Look, I know you don't think that third party will happen, but you watch. You watch the moment America starts to believe in something like this, you watch what happens when people get on board. Our country right now is ripe for a change. And I'm here to tell you, every 80 years, we have a massive shift in our country. 1776, here it is, by the way, right here. I'm going to do it. 1776 to 1780. First massive shift, right? Revolutionary War. Number 2, massive shift. Add 80 years. Let me grab my other pen. Add 80 right here. 1860, Civil War. Add another 80, 1940. Boom. World War, the whole world changes. Add 80, 2020. Would you look at that? Isn't that crazy? Every 80 years, something happens and massively shifts the deck in our country and in the world. And by the way, back in 1860, there were two political parties. There were the Democrats and the Whigs. The Whigs wouldn't stand up to slavery. And so out of the ashes came a new party called the Republican Party, which, by the way, was the party of anti-slavery. They were the party of anti-slavery back in 1860. Okay, 2 parties in the 1850s, 2 parties in 1860, just 2 completely different parties. So people who tell me, oh, you know, a third party isn't going to work. Yeah, well, it did already. I tell people, so I've talked to some of the biggest movers and shakers in Washington, and they go, yeah, it'll never happen. I say, well, it already did. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, 1855 to 1860, 2 parties, 2 parties, 2 different parties. All right. David Zetz, my man. By the way, to Lisa, put the website in there, edrushforpresident.com, or sorry, edrushforamerica.com. I don't want you to donate any money. We're not ready for that yet, but I do want you to read the principles that we have on the page right there. Gizzy says, you rock. Thank you, Lori. It's awesome to see you. I hope you're doing awesome, Ed. Always good to see what you say. Leora, love the way you love your own jokes. Yeah, I think my wife thinks that's hysterical too. I'm a CPA, but I don't work as one, so don't DM me. Yeah, I agree. No BLM. No BLM land is not anyway. John Kronstadt, what's up, my man? By the way, if you don't know who Jonathan Kronstadt is, he's president of a company called Kajabi. I use Kajabi for all of my membership sites, and you should too. And Jonathan, we should do an interview, man. I would love to talk to you about how to build an information product and take advantage of the hero economy. So let's hook up, man. I know I got your number. Yeah, Ed Rush for America is the website, by the way. Charles says he's in for the new party. And by the way, a whole bunch of you have already, I'm not asking for money right now. But when I was, a lot of you have already donated. And I'm telling you, man, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. All right. So, yeah, everybody's saying hello to Jonathan. He's a good friend in our world and our community. All right. So a couple things really quickly. And by the way, if you have any questions or comments or thoughts, we are actually just coming up on our time. But I just want to let you know what's coming up. So tomorrow is Thursday. I'm going to, hey, Damien, man, Damien was my assistant pastor of my church here in San Diego like 100 years ago, dude. I think it was only like 5 years ago. And by the way, just so you know, he pronounces his name Sheeter. Okay, it's Sheeter. What's up, dude? I hope you guys are doing awesome. Dude, I would imagine Juice Plus is killing it right now because, you know, everybody's trying to get themselves in shape. All right, so tomorrow I'm going to open up a new Thursday tradition called AMA Thursday. So AMA Thursday is Ask Me Anything, Ask Me Anything Thursday. So tomorrow's content is going to be largely driven by your own questions. So jump into YouTube Live or Facebook and get me your questions. I would love to interface and talk to you about that. You can send them to me ahead of time if you want to, but I'd prefer to do them live, okay? I am, however, also going to be getting into a deeper discussion of number 6. And remember what I said number 6 was, if you were taking notes, which you should have been, number 6 is on the screen right now, which says join the expert economy. When I mean join the expert economy, what I mean is being in a toll booth position where people are coming to you for answers for their business, their relationships, their health, or whatever it is that you're an expert on that you teach. And like I said, now's the time, I think, where this door is just blasting open. So tomorrow I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to make money with smaller numbers of people, but in bigger increments, right? So smaller numbers, bigger increments, maybe as a coach or a consultant or an advisor, okay? Thank you for all the awesome comments. Thank you, Gizzy. Said Ed Rush for president is simple. When there's one extraordinary human being who does the right things, we definitely, oh, thanks, man, I appreciate that. And he's from Germany, by the way. So you can go start your movement over in Germany. By the way, it would be awesome if any of the things I resonated with you, any of the things I said today resonated with you, it would be awesome if you shared this recording with your friend. Now, full disclosure, you don't have to agree with everything that I say. Remember I said I got out of tribal thinking where it's like I'm a Republican, I have to believe this about this, or I'm a Democrat, the leaders tell me that I have to believe, because tribal thinking is always wrong because one person or group can't be right about everything. That goes for me too, okay? So I'm not right about everything. I'm just thinking about everything. And there's a community that when we get together and we think about problems together, this sell land idea, by the way, wasn't even my idea. I was meeting with a friend of mine named Bill, who is a former mayor of South Miami, brilliant guy. And we were talking one night and he said, this is my idea for this. I'm like, this is awesome, dude. That is such a great idea. So like I said, it's not even like I didn't come up with it but I did come up with it in community, okay? So let me just tell you, I'm giving myself permission to be wrong about things, and I'm giving you permission to disagree with me on some things. We're not trying to start a cult. We're trying to start a community that changes the world, okay? And that's actually really important. So let's say you agreed with 90% of what I said. Man, we're cranking, all right? So thank you, Delisa, who put that in here. We are here Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific time, and there's the link if you happen to be on Facebook. Thanks, Wendell Bugs. Man, I appreciate that. Thanks for what you said. Dennis, you're the best, dude. Can't wait to see you in Dallas as well. And so we're going to be here tomorrow. Ask Me Anything Thursday. Do me a favor, hit the like button wherever you're at. That would really be a great honor to me. Share this with your friends. And if you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. It's usually right over here someplace. I'm not going to be emailing every time that I do one of these, but I would love to have you come and at least jump in for a few minutes and say hello, okay? All right, so tomorrow, Ask Me Anything, and then we're going to get into this new economy, and I'm going to show you some new ways that you can make money, because you're going to need it, frankly. And we're going to rock and roll, and we're going to have a blast, and we're going to have fun. All right. So I'm going to spend the next minute or two by the way, I should pull this up. We should end today's show. I yesterday on Twitter, Neil Diamond, I don't know if I can do this from a copyright standpoint. Maybe I should do it. Yesterday, I look at my Twitter page because I shared Neil Diamond. I mean, some stuff just cracks you up, man. And like, I know life is tough, but sometimes you gotta laugh when life's hard. So like on Twitter last night, Neil Diamond posted he was playing Sweet Caroline on the guitar in front of his fireplace at home on Twitter. And the song was exactly the same, except for the one part of the song where he says, touching me, touching you. He says, don't touch me, I won't touch you, sweet Caroline. Don't touch me, I won't touch you, sweet Caroline. So if you want something to laugh about, go to Twitter, find Neil Diamond. Just go to my Twitter page, @EdRushPilot, and you can see my post and watch Neil Diamond's 2-minute song, Sweet Caroline, where he says, don't touch me, I won't touch you, sweet Caroline. All right, so thank you for that. Gia, what a great thing you just said there. One of the best decisions I ever made was to go to the Ultimate Speaker in Dallas last October. You over-delivered massively, and I'm chuffed to be part of your community. All right, listen, I'm going to see you tomorrow. We're going to have a lot of fun. It's all good news from here on out. Now that we identified the problem, it's all good news from here on out. Thank you all. You are absolutely amazing. Say goodbye in chat. And I will talk to you soon. Listen, smile. It's going to get better. It's just going to take a little work for us to create whatever this is called, the revolution. All right, I'll talk to you soon. See you guys.